G'day everybody, welcome to another episode of the ESPN Footy Podcast, a very special episode, a very off-season episode. I'm joined by Jake Michaels, as I always am, and Rohan Connolly. Good to have you guys on the panel for today's show in the studio. As I said, very off-season areas with this episode, but a labour of Jake's love. So today we're going to be doing something called, I guess, every AFL club's Mount Rushmore. So we're going to be taking a look at, I guess, the faces of every club in the AFL, the four people who spring to mind when you talk about Adelaide, or you talk about Essendon, or you talk about the Western Bulldogs or Footscray. So it's going to be a long day, Jake.
It is.
Firstly, welcome along to you, and thank you for coming up with this idea because, as Rohan and I have talked about off the top, we're very into it. And we put a lot of labour of love into this, as we kind of said, but there's a lot of work to go into it.
Well, as you know, this was an idea that we sort of had probably 3 years ago, if we're being honest.
COVID ideas.
It never really got off the ground due to a myriad reasons, but it finally is up and running now. We're excited. We've spent a lot of time researching all these teams and going through everything, really. And there are so many players to consider when you're doing something like this. It's extremely tricky and it's extremely subjective as well.
And yeah, you've really got to sort of nail the criteria, don't you? And like we should say at the outset, we're not talking about coaches, otherwise it would be different. We're just talking about players.
I think it just adds another sort of curveball and another sort of element to
the most iconic players to pull on the Guernsey.
That's it.
Which is, and that's sort of half the fun, isn't it? Because often you're sort of weighing up records against status, and it's not always the numbers that dictate whether someone's an icon of a club, as will become clear. I can say though that just in preparation, every single person I've mentioned this to has gone, great idea. So pressure's on, Jake.
Well, we've got to deliver now.
Yeah, so as we said, players only is kind of going to be the vibe here. Stats don't mean absolutely everything.
But they do mean enough.
Like of course they do, yes.
That has to play into something.
But if there's a player who's just iconic and has played for a club and they only played 200 games, this is what we're going to have to go through, and this is where the challenge will lie.
There's a fine line. I mean, you don't, Clive Waterhouse doesn't get on Fremantle's as iconic as he is. Well, there's a balance here, isn't there, between record
and some clubs will be a bit easier to do, and that's fine. And some clubs will be very difficult. I think one of the clubs that, like, just off the top of your head, when you think of this kind of exercise, you think of Hawthorn being just one of the hardest to walk onto. And for a club that's had a lot of recent success, we might struggle to get some of the guys that were pivotal to that success onto that Mount Rushmore.
And it's worth stressing now, in all honesty, like, we don't have the list. We've got a list. We've got names.
Yes.
We've got all the research.
We'll be learning as you're
learning. But we haven't agreed or settled on a list yet. So there's going to be a lot of debate back and forth, I imagine, as we do it.
There's going to be fisticuffs, Jake. I'm prepared to fight to the death over it.
See, that's why I wanted to sit over here. I wanted to be as far away from you as possible.
Well, the great thing about having Rohan, thank you very much for coming in. You're sounding very throaty, so I appreciate you coming on when you might not be fully fit and firing.
It's just my Barry White impersonation.
But we've got you on, I guess, with all due respect, for a slightly more historical perspective. Both of us sort of being a slightly younger generation, and this is going to be part of the challenge as well, is looking at recency bias and how much credence you give guys that have played more recently, but also not trying to give too much credence to guys that played so long ago that not many people either have vision of these guys or, just because they've been iconic names for so long, do they get on?
Look, I'm very happy to play the old codger role. I thought it was a step too far. You guys tell me don't bring a laptop so we can just perpetuate the myth. I can actually use a laptop, everyone. I have got a laptop. In fact, my details are all on my phone, so I'm pushing the argument that I'm actually more contemporary than you guys with your silly old laptop.
Good stuff. So we're going to do this in 3 parts because I think it might be a bit of a long one. So
I think so.
Maybe those long Christmas Day drives or whenever you might be listening to this, a good opportunity to chuck it on, have a debate with us, yell at the radio or the TV if you are watching this from our studio. Or Crystal Set
if you're, you don't even know what
a Crystal Set is.
No, you're really showing your age there. 3 parts. We'll probably go 6 clubs.
I think so. 6-6-6 works well.
6-6-6, very good.
And I think, let us know. Like, I mean, we'll talk about this as we go through, and by the time we get to the end, I imagine we might sort of recap all the fours. We are going to settle on 4 for each club. And let us know who you guys think deserves to be on it, where we got it right, where we got it wrong.
You can find us on the socials at Twitter or X. We are at Footy Tips, but we might as well, I guess, crack into it. And so the first club, the first cab off the rank, Adelaide Crows, one of the clubs that probably hasn't been around as long as others, obviously, but still a difficult discussion, I think, Jake, and maybe I might throw to you to kick things off.
Yeah, well, it is. And like we said before, you're weighing up so many different things when it comes to any club. I think you'll find themes as we go through club by club that there's probably one or two absolute locks for each club, and then you're sort of debating the other two spots. And I think it's pretty clear when we can start with Adelaide that the two locks, and at least for me, I think you guys might agree, would be Andrew McLeod, probably one, and then sort of 1A is Mark Rasciuto. I think they're the two that I don't think anyone's going to have any problem with those two guys being on the club, being on the Mount Rushmore. I mean, Andrew McLeod, one of the best players that I've ever seen play. He's got most games for the club, 346 most goals, 2 flags, and obviously the 2 Norm Smith medals, which is just enhances his legacy as well. 5 All-Australians. And Mark Rasciuto as well. He's top 5 in goals, top 5 in games, Brownlow medal, and 8 All-Australians, 2 of them named as captain. So I don't think there's anyone's going to have any problem with those two guys being on it.
No, and the only they're actually very close in my view. And Rasciuto unfortunately was injured and missed out on 97, got to play in 98. But McLeod, I think we see more of Rasciuto because of his media career. But McLeod is one everyone just goes, oh, absolute super champion. I think the longer time goes on, sometimes you forget exactly how good Rasciuto was. I mean, he was a real bull of a midfielder and so consistent and a proven big occasion player and 8 All-Australians. It's pretty remarkable.
Do you think Mark Rasciuto would have been, I mean, we're not talking like 50 years apart, but would he be a better player or more appreciated in today's game?
That's a good question. He probably, I feel like he played his career as we saw that transition towards the bigger body midfielder.
Yeah.
So maybe he could have been more fated had he started a bit later. I think that's a valid point. But just extending what you're saying too about the 2 locks, this is a difficulty with Adelaide. They're a relatively new club, and yet that joust for the other 4 on Rushmore, for those not up on their American history,
yes.
The joust for the other 2 spots is really intense, and there's some great candidates. So, look, I'll give you a couple of the candidates I'm thinking of for the other 2. You throw up a couple. Well, for me, number 3 for Adelaide, it's not crystal clear, but in the end it probably was clearish, and that's Simon Goodwin. 275 games, 2 premierships, 3 best and fairest, 5 All-Australians.
Yep.
And just thinking about that record too, I go back to that 97 flag they won. They were remarkable, those 97 and 98 premierships. But one of the great things about their win in 97 was there was a group of guys who were real newcomers into the football scene, and Goodwin was one of them. He was pivotal in both their preliminary final and grand final wins in 97. He had a handful of games under his belt at that stage. So it gives you an idea of just how good a player he was. Another who I think his prowess purely as a player has sort of been diminished a bit just by the passage of time.
Yeah, I think you said something before when you're talking about Mark Rasciuto, and the same sort of thing can be said for Simon Goodwin. Players that are now in the public eye, whether it's through media or obviously coaching in Simon Goodwin's case, do we give them a little bit more than, say, someone like Andrew McLeod, who we don't really hear much from? It's something I hadn't thought about before.
It's very likely, and I think it might happen more with a club like Adelaide than it might other clubs. And I think this is purely because it'll happen with other clubs more so than Adelaide, because there are more highlights of the guys. So if you want to go back and look at Andrew McLeod highlights, it's pretty easy to do. And I think, to the point, back on him for a very brief second, I think I remember reading about draftees and they were talking about their heroes and they were still naming him as like this sort of prototypical dasher who just was so silky with the ball.
Yep.
And that's kind of the point is these guys who are icons of their club, you can still go and see what you need to see. Whereas there are going to be like clubs that have, 100-year-old history where you're just not going to know enough about them. And so I wonder about that, but I think that with the Crows, you kind of still they're a modern enough club that if you really want to go out and seek these guys' highlights out, you can go and find them.
Yep. Incidentally, just when you mentioned silky about McLeod, the aspect of him as a champion that I think gets overlooked is how tough he was. He was tough,
Yeah.
and in the
Aren't
best.
they all tough?
Yeah, but in the best possible way. Just a real hard nut, you know, and also actually taller than he played taller than his size as well. So he just encompassed everything really. And I don't know why I'm saying that because we're not needing to prove his claims, but. Sorry to steal your thunder, Jake. There's another good example, I think perhaps our first example of the guy whose numbers don't necessarily match the others, but whose deeds and status do, and that is Mark Bickley, the captain of those 97-98 premiership sides.
Yeah, well, speaking of players that, I mean, he's certainly got the numbers to back it up. It didn't play his whole career there, and a name that sort of got thrown out and thought, gee, he's definitely a chance to make this. And that's Eddie Betts when you look at him and the sort of figure that he has become for the Crows.
You talk about icons and goals of the year and Eddie's pocket. And
he's got his own pocket at Adelaide, as everyone knows. He's one of the most beloved players to have played for that club. 132 games only, but 310 goals, and we know that ratio.
Third on the list for the Crows.
That ratio is pretty strong for this era.
So I don't want to catch you out here, but what 310 goals for the Crows? Can you tell us how many?
I think it's
for
similar.
Carlton?
I think it.
So it's about a 50-50 split.
Without checking it. 3 All-Australians.
330 for Carlton.
4-time leading goal kicker and 3 goal of the years. I mean. Goal of the years might not be an award when you're talking about who's the best player of all time. It's a bit, it's a bit fluky, but it's like you can't rely on that for who's the best player. But I think that does add to his legacy of what he was and the kind of player that he was for the Crows. And I think, as listeners know, I'm a Carlton supporter. I still think of Eddie as an Adelaide player.
That's interesting.
More so than a Carlton player. I think he considerably played his better footy at the Crows.
Yeah.
So you talk about icons and you talk about awards like Goal of the Year. There's another player that we could mention who gave Mark of the Year a shake a few times. And you talk about... yes.
Is that what you're going to say?
No, it wasn't, but I like where you're thinking with that. Iconic. Call. Modra.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you talk about Adelaide, iconic figures, the real Camry Crows era.
Yeah.
Modra is one of those guys who, again, didn't play his whole career at the club, but played probably arguably his best footy there.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, guys that pulled on the Guernsey, he's one that springs to mind.
And you know what? I reckon a bit stiff too in that he did his knee in that 97 preliminary final, cost him playing a premiership, was borderline to play in that 98 side, but in the end couldn't squeeze in. So he ends up not playing premiership. And
I think that has to affect
it does. Sort of but thing. If you say Modra, I immediately think of 1993. He was what Gary Ablett became. He was as big a name as there was in football in 1993. The marks, the 100 plus, 120 odd goals, I think, for that season. The Mark of the Year, so many candidates for Mark of the Year. Absolute star, and that particular... I mean, he did it for longer than that season, really, up to 97. So you're talking about a span of probably 5 seasons.
Yep.
But he was as big a name as the game has seen in that 5. So I think it's a really good call. And I'm a bit dirty on myself for not having put him on the shortlist.
Wasn't he on the shortlist?
We mentioned him before, but the other candidate probably is Taylor Walker.
But Taylor Walker, when I started going through these and I was jotting names down and just sort of looking at numbers and all of that, Taylor Walker might surprise a lot of people. He has kicked the most goals for the Crows, and by a fair margin too. Most goal assists as well. He's been a player that looked like his career was over a few years ago, and has managed to just resurrect it. I mean, it's
so
incredible
when you actually,
what he's been able to do.
So hopefully we've got the same numbers here, but 612 goals, 7-time leading goal kicker.
Yeah.
That's
and this is where we start having the discussion of flags versus no flags. And yes, you've got individual success and individual accolades, but when it compares to especially a club that has had success in the quote unquote modern era-ish.
And also to that point, that we're going back 5 or 6 years ago, the Crows had maybe the best forward line in the comp. So it wasn't like he was just the only guy that was there and he was kicking goals.
This is where Adelaide's flags are probably a bit more deceptive than other clubs because, with all due respect, they're about the 4th or 5th best side in the competition both years they won the flag. Whereas in 05 and 06,
Yes.
when they didn't even get to a grand final, they were the best side in the competition.
Yeah, minor premiers, one of those years, I'm pretty sure.
So you shouldn't pay too high a penalty for not playing in the
So where are we going to go? Because I think you said 1 and 2 are pretty locked in.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned Scott Thompson or Tyson Edwards as well.
No, it was another one we haven't mentioned who actually I'm going to lobby, I think, for my fourth, and that is Ben Hart.
Yep.
Magnificent defender, 311 games, played in both those premierships, 4-time All-Australian. But Hart was, he was smart, he was versatile, could play on tools and smaller opponents. You say Ben Hart, the image that always comes to mind for me is the 98 grand final, in which Adelaide went to the halftime break 4 goals down, should have been 10 goals down, but had it not been for Ben Hart, there is no way they would have even been in the race to come back and win that grand final. He was a seriously good player, and I'm going to lobby my. I've got him in my four.
See, is he more of an icon than Eddie Betts, though?
No way.
Icon, yeah.
Not
Mount
even.
Rushmore, but does Eddie Betts sit comfortably on the Mount Rushmore if you are a Carlton fan and you're looking at that? Does it matter?
Betts for me is on it if you combine both clubs, but we're not doing that.
No, so that's another important point
McLeod,
as well.
Rashudo.
So everything you've done outside of the club we're looking at basically doesn't count.
Yeah.
So let's do it. Yeah, McLeod and Rashudo, they're on there, and then it's who are the other two? I
think Tex is on there.
I think Goodwin.
Goodwin easily.
I think Goodwin's the third pick, and then
we're arguing over fourth.
Yeah.
So who our nominee? Well, I'm lobbying hard for Ben Hart. You reckon Eddie Betts?
I think I would have Betts or Walker over Hart.
You reckon Walker?
I think Walker. Maybe it's Tex.
I mean, he has kicked the most goals for the club.
I can,
comfortably.
I can.
And he's not yet done.
Apologies, Ben, but I can live with
the stiff
Tex.
list. We'll have a hell of a stiff list after this. It'll be your best 22.
No, I think Walker.
So we're giving it to Tex over Eddie. I think so. Just 132 games, and as you'll see as we go on, I mean, I'm sure we will have some players that have played
twice as many goals.
Yeah.
With all due respect to Eddie, and 7-time leading goal kicker.
Yeah.
And that moustache.
All right. Well, that's one club down.
So
17 to go.
Go through them again. McLeod,
Rashudo, Goodwin, and Walker. Yeah, pretty solid.
Not bad.
We might have to rank all 18 by the end of it.
Oh gosh, that's another episode.
Who would win a 4-on-4?
All right, we are going to move on to club number 2, the Brisbane Lions. Now, there was a bit of conjecture leading into this podcast as to what the Brisbane Lions meant and how we define them, and we've come up with the the idea that it's going to be the Brisbane Lions era, and there's a few reasons to this. I think the way that the Fitzroy era ended, Rohan, was disappointing to say the least in terms of the fans and the way that it was handled by the league. So it's kind of just a bit, I don't know, it'd almost be a disservice to lump them into the same.
I think so. It was for those old enough to, and I reported on the whole thing, it was a merger.
Yes.
And Fitzroy, for the record, they wanted to merge with North Melbourne.
Yep.
It got torpedoed by the other clubs and the AFL, who were worried about them becoming too strong. I'll just throw a cat among the pigeons here. What about the Brisbane Bears component of this? Because you're talking 1987.
Yeah, so there is a bit of crossover.
There's a little bit of crossover, and I think that's fine.
Yeah, Brisbane Bears / Brisbane Lions. Yeah, there is going to be a bit of crossover.
No, I
with
think
some of
that's
these
fair
players.
enough. I think that's fair enough.
Well, Jake, where do we want to start? Because when you talk about successful clubs that won multiple premierships and in a row, it goes Adelaide and then it goes Brisbane, and we're right there again.
Yeah, and I think it's probably easy to start with the lock or locks, but it's also important to not just gloss over them and forget to acknowledge how great these players were.
Yes.
So you speak of the back-to-back for the Lions, who was their captain, Michael Voss. I think he's probably the first guy picked for this. Triple premiership captain, the Brownlow medalist, 5-time club best and fairest, and you're talking about an era, like a phenomenal era.
On-field leadership. The iconic scenes of him and Scott Burns and just the way that he carried himself on the field. You talk about big bruising leaders and those midfielders who were big-bodied.
And I've got to say this too, there should be another gong there that isn't, and that is Norm Smith, because famously or infamously, his last 5 minutes in that 2002 grand final won them that game.
Yes.
And
of course, the way the voting goes is...
Well, correct.
Yes.
I mean, the votes were gathered before that last 5 minutes, and no disrespect to Nathan Buckley.
Yes.
But had the votes been collected at the end of the game, I reckon Vossi would have won.
And not to go on a tangent there, but it still is like that, as far as I'm aware.
Can I tell her? It's not out of school. Can I? No, I should tell this story.
Because you've done the Norm Smith voting a couple of times.
I've done it twice. I did it in 1995 when Greg Williams won,
Yep.
and I did it in 2006 when Andrew Embley won.
That was one of the biggest stitch-ups of all time. Chris Judd robbed.
No, I don't. Well, everyone who voted in 06 gave Embley the 3 votes. But what I will never forget is that there'd been this big controversy about when the votes were collected.
Yes.
So they made a big production of, you won't have to, the votes won't be collected until the end of the game. So it's the 06 grand final. It's literally a point the difference. Yeah. I get the tap on the shoulder 5 minutes before the game saying, "Where's your votes?" And I said, "Are you serious?" So I just refused to.
2006 is easy. Just send a text to whoever's on the ground. Hey, knackers, this is my
your
vote.
point was they want them before the game's finished.
Yeah, that's the.
And I didn't look. To be fair, I didn't completely go off my cruet as I have in other occasions. But I said, "Hey, hang on, it's 1 point the difference. I'm not giving you the votes yet."
Someone kicks a winning goal.
Anyway,
and
I'm very miffed by you saying what you just said. We all voted on Embley.
I know. I was very disappointed by that.
Anyway,
all right. So let's get back onto track.
So
Voss is your number one.
Oh, I think pretty clearly. I
for me,
I think it's going to be similar to McLeod with the Crows. I don't think too many people are going to be bothered by that. 289 games, 245 goals, one of the great midfielders of the era.
Yeah.
And one of the best players of the modern era. Do we call Vossi the modern era?
Well,
what's the modern era?
Well, I don't know. To
2000 plus? I don't know.
I think modern era to me now is probably AFL era, so 1990 onwards.
Yeah. Okay. A very large modern era. Okay. And then if you had to go next down, who's next down?
Oh, that to me is pretty clear. Simon Black.
It's always funny with this because it's like someone will say, "Oh, this is easy," and then you think, "Is it going to be the same person I've got?"
Well, I mean, Brisbane's for me. Brisbane, there's 5 standouts, and the 4 have to come from those 5. Yep. But for me, if I'm ranking them, Black is second for me behind Voss. 322 games, 3 premierships, a Brownlow, a Norm Smith. 3 best and fairest, 3 All-Australians.
And one of the most admired and respected players.
Yeah. And again, I talked about McLeod. Black, silky, but tough, really, really tough player.
Yeah.
And one of the great individual grand finals of all time, 39 disposals in that 03 belting of Collingwood. That is one of the great individual grand final performances.
So this is where it comes back a bit to, I think those 2 are going to be on regardless of whether you're looking at the best players or the Mount Rushmore and the real faces and the legacy and all of that. But I think when you're looking at that sort of who are the faces of the club, I think this next guy really deserves to be either the 3rd or 4th spot, and that's Jonathan Brown.
He was
really feels Brisbane.
Yeah, absolutely he does.
And a bit of that might well be, and like I said before, we remember him more because we see him more. As
Potentially,
opposed to...
but also I think he embodied that tough team at the time as well. The highlight that everyone keeps seeing is when he's going back with the flight and putting himself in harm's way, and it was just what Brownie did. But that's the iconic vision, and that kind of sums up that team of that era.
I'm going to be throwing several cats among the pigeons, it appears. Don't. I haven't got him.
Yeah,
what?
Okay. See, this was the point. I was actually going to say this before you jumped in. I was going to say, but he wasn't the best forward in the league at the time. It's not like he's ever been. I mean, he was obviously their number one. He's the club's leading goal kicker, I guess. When we're talking about the Brisbane Lions.
Yep.
But in terms of that era, I think the AFL was blessed with key forwards that were kicking more goals.
Well, the other thing too is I think, and probably. Actually, can you give us his numbers?
Yeah, quick little stat line on Jonathan Brown. So obviously triple premiership player as well.
How many games?
He played 256 games, 594 goals, won a Coleman medal, 5-time club leading goal kicker. And probably something that surprised me when I was looking up some Jonathan Brown numbers was only 2 All-Australians.
Well, this is my point.
I know what you're saying, but I would have thought it would have been 3 or 4, but 2 All-Australians.
See, are you okay? You were talking about great key forwards. I think I've probably penalised Brownie a bit for playing his best football as the Lions got weaker as a side.
And I don't think...
Which
I
isn't
think
his
that's unfair.
fault. He was a young gun. Yeah, it is. But I just want to throw a name in here who I think, and I've slipped up here because I've got his total games, not specifically his games for Brisbane. But Alistair Lynch.
Yep.
186 for Brisbane.
186, okay. 3-time premiership player, 6-time leading goal kicker.
Lynch over Brown on the Mount Rushmore.
Jeez, he was good. Well, okay, let's talk about the totality here. My other two candidates for Rushmore are absolutely worthy. Now, as annoying as he could be on occasions later on post-football career, Jason Ackermanis, 325 games, 3 premierships, Brownlow, won the goal kicking twice for them, 2 best and fairest, 4 All-Australian, and then the guy who was the 4th musketeer, if you like, and sort of the quietest one, Nigel Lappin.
Yes.
279 games, 3 premierships, 1 best and fairest, 4 All-Australians.
I think there's no disrespect to Nigel Lappin, but I think he's a step down from every other player we've mentioned so far.
Do you agree? For me, I'm looking at that now, and I granted what you're saying about Brown, but for me, Acker is a lock.
Yep.
A lock.
I tend to think,
I can agree
I think Ackermanis and Brown are in the same class of iconic player, iconic Brisbane.
How many games Brown again?
256. So we played more than...
Goals?
594.
Best and fairest?
Never won a best and fairest as
leading goal kicker? 5
times. So Lynch was 6, Brown was 5. I don't think you have both on. I think it's one of them.
Yeah, well, Lynchy, some of Lynchy's might have been with Fitzroy. I might have slipped up there, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
no, look, I'll climb down. I'll give you Brown if you give me
he's putting some credits in the bank for later for the other teams.
The Bombers are coming up.
I want to throw up a name. Not in no way am I saying the guy deserves to be on it, but it's almost a let's extrapolate the career a little bit more. Lachie Neale, what he's done in 111 games.
So this was going to be my next point and we probably should have done
extrapolate. I love you using that.
A little bit more for the Crows as well. But current players you can see making a run for this, and you talk. Lachie Neale has played a lot of footy at Freo, but what he's been able to achieve at Brisbane, you cannot argue with.
He got there when the club was shocking. He's played 111 games, 5 seasons, has a winning percentage of 68%. He's won 2 Brownlows in the 5 years and could easily have been 3. Should have been 3. Averaging 25 Brownlow votes a season as a Lion. He's the captain, 3 All-Australians. Again, should have been 4. And 3 club best and fairest. Again, this is in 5 years. This is a phenomenal career for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I know everyone knows I'm a big Lachie Neale fan, but I'm not saying he's going to get on, and he's not getting on in at the moment ahead of any of those 4 or 5 names that we've said.
Yeah, but it's a definite watch this space.
Watch this space, but also if he did start his career at the Lions, he's probably on.
Yeah. No, that is a very
another person
case.
who's got some time to go, and I guess similar to the Eddie Betts mould, came over from another club, but has made Brisbane his home and has kicked a lot of goals. Well, no, I wasn't going to go that way. I was going to go Charlie Cameron. Iconic Brisbane of the last 5 years. Yep. He's there.
Where's he in Brisbane goals?
He's
top
1,
5?
2, 3, 4, 6. He's just outside.
How many goals?
273. Yeah, with a asterisk.
I don't know why. When you mentioned Brisbane iconic, I started thinking of John Gastev. Remember Johnny Gastev?
We might start moving on, but just for the sake of argument, there are obviously some names that played at Old Fitzroy that would be walk-up starts on if we did a separate one for that club as well. And there are some names there. Bernie Quinlan, obviously. Gary Wilson. Yeah, Hayden Button.
Well, Hayden Button, triple Brownlow medalist. Kevin Murray. Iconic, this is right off the top of my head.
So,
Fitzroy icons.
We're not ignoring these guys, it's just
Gary Wilson.
Kind of what we've done for
as Rohan said off the top, I think it would be a disservice to both by combining them as one club.
Yes.
But just to recap what we've got with Brisbane Bears /Lions.
Yes.
So we've got Michael Voss, Simon Black, Jason Ackermanis, and Jonathan Brown, probably in that order.
In that order?
I think so.
Okay. For me, yep.
I'd swap the order, but I'm happy to concede.
What would your order
You'd
be?
swap Acker and
I'd
Brown?
have Brown, then Acker.
Oh, you'd have Brown ahead of Acker?
Yeah, I think so.
Nah.
I wouldn't be too fussed either way.
Was that a dismissive enough?
All right, very good. So we should, I guess, move on. The Blues, you know, one of the clubs that has been around for a long time.
Okay, do we do a disclaimer here that you guys both very
Well, I think the listener base is very familiar with that by now. But
you could also sort of say I haven't seen a modicum of success compared to
That's true.
some of
So
my
my
older
opinion on this
contemporaries.
stuff should carry more weight.
Well, yeah, but also I actually found Carlton, again, we haven't settled on a 4 yet, as it's probably becoming clear now, but I found Carlton one of the tougher ones to do. I think there are, not saying they've got the most great players, I think there are other clubs that probably, Richmond and Hawthorn probably just turn elite.
They're up there. Well,
But
I remember when...
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I was going to say, I think there's probably 8 to 10 legitimate candidates for Carlton that probably would feel stiff not to be on it.
I think when Carlton were towards the end of that incredibly successful period, we used to talk frequently about how many individual champions that club had produced.
Yes.
The thing is, a lot of them tend to be concertinaed into that era between Barassi's arrival in 65 and 2000.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of tough to know where to start. Do you start with...
Well, I'll let Roko kick this one off with your probable lock or two.
Yeah, well, the number one for me is pretty obvious in lots of ways. One of the most revered players in the history of the game. When we talk about great ruckman, everyone talks about John Nichols.
Hall of Fame legend.
And the thing about him being that I think he was 6'2", I think Marcus Bontempelli, etc., are all taller than him. But 328 games, 3 premierships, Hall of Fame legend, of which there are now only 31.
Correct.
5 best and fairest, 2 All-Australian, captain coach of a premiership side in 1972, and just big, powerful...
Big Nick.
Big Nick, and one of the best big occasion players of all time. 2 performances which stand out, 1970 in the famous comeback against Collingwood. He was huge, resting down forward. And then famously, 72, the record score win over Richmond when Percy Jones got switched into the number 1 ruck role and Big Nick parked himself in the goal square and kicked 6 goals. He kicked 6, Robert Walls 6.
Clubs would kill for a ruckman that could do that these days.
300 games, 300 goals is a pretty good mark.
For a guy who's not...
for anybody.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's...
Oh, particularly in that era.
Yeah. I'm very comfortable with that as a number 1, I think, in terms of icons of the club.
And whilst I'm going... I'm going to push my luck a bit here and give you what... Because 1, 2 and 3 are absolute locks for me.
Okay.
Number 2, Alex Jesaulenko.
Another Hall of Fame legend.
Names don't come any bigger. 279 games, 4 premierships, Hall of Fame legend, 2 All-Australian. All-Australian didn't mean as much. And 3 times leading goal.
Can you talk about Alex Jesaulenko a bit more than... Because I think a lot of people know him, and fair enough, but they know him for the mark.
The mark. What else? Okay.
What else? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. He was sort of ahead of his time. He was really not that tall, but great leap, incredibly mobile, fantastic at ground level as well as in the air. Mike Williamson, famous commentator of the 60s, 70s, used to call him the Worm. He was fantastic at cat-like reflexes, and so versatile. He could play as a half-forward flanker. He could play in the middle. He kicked 100 goals in 1972, playing as like a small key forward. Then, of course, later in tail end of his career, when he captain coached Carlton, another captain coach of the Carlton flag, 79, he went down back and became a sort of attacking halfback flanker.
It's pretty remarkable.
Oh yeah, no, ahead of his time as a player, and you're talking icons and whatever. None bigger than Jezza. Like he's right up there in the top.
And a testament to sort of that era of migrants as well, and coming over and embracing the game.
Yeah, he was the face of multiculturalism in football.
Yeah. So is he a top 10 most iconic name in footy?
Oh, yeah.
Name?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, in my view.
Geez, we'll have to do an overall Rushmore.
That's a different one.
No, a list of iconic names. He for me is right up near the top.
You had a third lock, and I'm comfortable with these so far. I'm happy to throw out some more names later. But
yeah, my third lock, again, same era, Bruce Doull. 356 games, 4 premierships. Halfback flank in the AFL Team of the Century, selected in 1996. One Norm Smith medal. Four, as a defender, not too many of them doled out.
That's fair.
Four best and fairest.
Four best and fairest. We will
in a competitive era.
And I don't disagree. I think he is a lock on Carlton's Mount Rushmore. But you know what's interesting, and he could be the only player. Do you know how many goals Bruce Doull kicked?
Handful. 20 odd.
20?
22. So good guess.
Okay.
But it's probably have the lowest goal count that'll make his team.
Rod Carter, who played for Sydney, I still remember this, Tilt. He kicked his first goal well after his 300th game.
Yeah, but he's not getting on the Mount Rushmore.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then, so already I'm starting to see there are names, Carlton royalty that's missing.
Yeah,
out
here. I don't disagree with any of them. Of course, I've got all those names, but the one guy that I had pretty high up, in very close to vying for top spot, was Stephen Kernahan.
Sticks.
Oh, well,
I think so.
okay. You guys have a crack. The only other two names I have on this list, shortlist. So I've got a shortlist of 5.
Yep.
And the other two names are Stephen Kernahan and Stephen Silvani.
I think a Silvani has to be on this. You talk about Carlton, you talk about the Italian link, the migrant connection, and an iconic family. He is the guy, isn't he? Was back, could swing forward. You talk about 312 games, and as a full back most of the time, 200 goals. So you talk to your 300 point.
Yep.
300 as a guy who was, not necessarily a forward at all.
Yep.
I think Steve has to be on that list.
Okay, well, just making the case for Sticks. So most goals, 738. That averaged nearly 3 a game over his career. 11-time Carlton leading goal kicker.
Phenomenal.
Carlton captain for 11 years and
Yep.
led the team to 2 flags and 3 Carlton best and fairest.
And appointed captain at the age of 21 or 22 or whatever it was.
I don't know how he doesn't get on.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to influence you guys, but he does. For me, Kernahan fractionally shades as
Silvani.
Yeah, for me, Kernahan just
Any
ahead of
wiggle room
Silvani.
on?
See, I tend to think
Bruce Doull.
I tend to think it's Nichols, Kernahan, Silvani. Jezelenko, Silvani.
Oh, you got no Doull.
Then Doull.
356 games, 4 premierships, AFL Team of the Century, 4 best and fairest. And I will tell you, I'm sorry, I know this is where I'm going to play the old codger card. Carlton supporters watching this now, pondering the possibility of no Bruce Doull, you guys are going to get some very interesting...
Yeah, but
No,
Carlton
but I've
Carlton
had this
supporters are
conversation
also
with my
pondering the
family
idea
many
of...
times.
The Carlton supporters are always will be listening, thinking, pondering the possibility of no Sticks or no Silvani. It's not like we're saying... Patrick Cripps has to be on instead of Bruce Doull.
whoever misses of those 3
you're leaving
is
out
really stiff.
an icon of the club.
You're leaving out icons. Craig Bradley, all-time games record holder.
Yeah.
Anthony Koutafidis, iconic 90s and early 2000s footballer. Everyone wanted to be
Wayne
Kouta.
Johnston.
Wayne Johnston, the Dominator.
I've mentioned a couple of players
Serge
so
played
far.
239 games. If you want to keep going down the goal kicking list, Harry Valance, who not many people know a lot about. And Soapy, but he kicked a lot. He kicked 722 majors, but not in consideration.
Yeah.
And this is kind of, I guess, we just don't know enough about that era. And
I like as you've probably seen already with a couple of nominations I've had for the other clubs, but the what ifs or what could have been, and one for Carlton is Fev. 575 goals from 187 games. Now that's you'll hear of other players from 50, 60, 70 years ago that were doing that regularly. But the era where he was doing it, and in a woeful Carlton side, was unbelievable.
No, it's a good. How many leading goal kicker gongs?
I'm not sure, but I imagine he did just about every year he was there. I mean, he was a phenomenal player.
Yep.
And whenever I think of Fev, I still can't not remember when he got stranded on 99 in 2008 and couldn't get his 100th goal.
Yes.
The same night Buddy got his 100th for the Hawks. I'll never forget Alistair Clarkson for that. Double teaming him with a minute to go when they're up by about 80 points. But anyway.
It's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, but I just think, imagine if he played forget 300 games, what about 260 games? And Carlton were a little bit better.
What if Cooter doesn't do his knee, wins a Brownlow and kicks another 50 goals, and suddenly he's on that list of 300 and 300? There's a few of these, and you go back even further, and Carlton, rich in South Australian history in poaching a lot of these players. Peter Motley was supposed to come across and become one of the greatest Carlton players of all time, and unfortunately, tragically, never got the chance.
And such a great player too. I mean, you're right. I mean, when Motley, Kernahan, and Bradley all came together at the start of '86, I mean, that was just so massive. Speaking of interstate connections, Carlton had a strong Western Australian connection
big time, yes.
And Kenny Hunter, great Carlton player.
Again, these are names that we're going
to
find
I think okay, let's
get back
sort this out.
Yes.
It comes down to those three for those two spots.
So where do you have Doull rank? You've got him.
I've got Doull third.
Third.
And clearly third.
Behind Nichols and Jezza.
And I think the danger is, I think unobtrusive. But he just never got beaten by his opponent.
He's got credits in the bank roll.
Played on keepers, regularly played on Royce Hart, one of the all-time greats, and beat him. Could play on smalls as well. Was still doing it in his mid-30s.
You know what I reckon counts for 0.001%? Just for these things where we can't quite... The look. The iconic look. He's a very recognisable...
Mount Rushmore. You have that here. People know who that is.
So much so you can remember who actually ripped the headband off him, and it was Tony Bahaggio in the 1981 night.
Okay, Sticks with the mullet. So maybe it's Sticks, Doull...
Silvani misses
Nichols
out.
and Silvani misses
out.
For
me.
It's sporting families. The Silvani's on the Mount Rushmore in terms of if it was a family.
Is he the best fullback of all time?
Isn't he fullback of the century?
He's officially fullback of the century.
But he misses out.
Well, yeah.
But also Doull's in that team, right? Doull is in that team.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
we're going to cop a bit here.
You're going
Carlton fans,
you are going to...
I think we've explained it pretty well.
Yeah,
I think so.
And this is the reality. No matter who you leave off, it's, like I said, we're not trying to squeeze in Lockie Henderson. We're not trying... We're like you're leaving out
it's
an
pretty
all-timer.
good talent. I don't think we can explain it any better than that, but any disgruntled Carlton supporters, please direct all your hate mail to Matt Walsh and Jake Michaels.
At Footy Tips
I've got no part of it.
So we'll just recap again. So we've got Nichols... Jesselinko, Doull, and Kernahan.
Correct.
And Silvani.
Many apologies to the whole Silvani family.
Anyone current from the Blues that you could see making a push?
I don't think so. I mean, everyone will say Patrick Cripps is the most likely.
Silvani's stiff.
I don't think... Put it this way, if Silvani...
Yes.
What, Jack?
No, as if Steve Silvani is stiff to miss out.
Sorry.
That's what I'm going to say.
Charlie Curnow?
I mean...
Laughing. It's hard to know without the benefit of hindsight.
He's a talented player, but
he has got time on his side.
He's
got time on his side.
Mantley wins a flag or two.
You'd say it about Sam Walsh, couldn't you? He could win 5 Brownlows.
Yeah,
it's hard to see it happening.
It is hard. I think it's not as if I think Lachie Neale is more likely to get on Brisbane's than either Cripps or Curnow on Carlton's.
It's too late for Cripps, I think.
Yeah, what would Cree have to do? He'd have to win at least another Brownlow and probably captain Carlton to a premiership.
At least one flag.
To be even in consideration.
I think we've exceeded our Carlton quota here.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's get on to the next club. And speaking of clubs that may have current players in the mix, I think the Pies are probably one where we could head that way. And I think we're all in agreement with this.
Well, absolutely. Are you talking about the young Nick Dacos?
We could be.
Are you talking about players in the future or are you talking about right now? Are we getting straight into it?
Well, yeah, I'm talking about right now.
All right, well, we will get straight into it. And I think, Rohan might disagree in terms of the order, but I think there's no doubt he'll have this guy on there, at least I hope. Scott Pendlebury, and in my opinion, one of the best 3 players I've ever watched play in my life. I'm not, I haven't seen players from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Live. I only really have 20 years of live that I can remember with my own eyes. And there aren't many that I've ever watched that are more skilled, as smart as he is.
So the longevity aspect.
Yeah, so then you take that and then you combine it with the longevity and then you combine it with the accolades. So he's the most games for the club, 383, soon to be 400, you'd imagine, next year. Most goal assists, most clearances, most inside 50s, most tackles for the club, most disposals, most tackles in the history of the game. Collingwood captain for 9 years, 2-time premiership player, Norm Smith medal, 5 best and fairest, God knows how many times he's finished top 3. I think it's about 13 times or something. 6 All-Australian selections, 3 Anzac Day medals. And as I said, he's on...
3 Anzac Day medals. Only players from 2 teams can win those.
It's still an accolade that you win. What
It's 3 more than Courtney Johns.
You're not gonna give him credit for it. He is on a very, very short list of the best players I've ever seen.
I concur with everything you've said.
I don't think he's number 1 on the list.
He's not my number 1, but he's probably number 2.
Yeah.
Should I say who number 1 is?
Well, just on Pendlebury, I think one of the things that highlights just how good he's been for such a long period of time. It's not like he's had,
he might be the most consistent player of all time.
I feel
5th most Brownlow votes in history and has not won it. So he's he's got the most without winning.
Yep.
I feel like the kudos for him has come in a rush, but in a way it's a testament to him as well. It's
as
like
you approach 400, you get introspective about it.
Yeah, because it's like, hang on a sec, look at those numbers, and then you think, and it's that consistency of performance. He's been, top 3 BNF so many times. Yep. 25 plus disposals virtually every week.
Yeah.
The unflustered nature of the way he plays, the creativity. Apparently he played basketball.
Really?
We do hear that a bit. But I
think
it
the
is
way
a phenomenal
he plays,
record.
His game style was always going to stack up in terms of playing late into his 30s because he didn't rely on the explosiveness or the pace. He relied on his skills and his intelligence on the field. And that's why we don't see a decline from him. We see a decline from players that they lose that step or that burst, and you're not the same anymore.
Yeah.
But we don't comfortably on it. I think probably around 3. And maybe 2, maybe 4, maybe 3.
See, I think that's low. I think he's at the lowest second.
At the lowest second. Who's your number 1?
I tend to agree.
There's some.
So, who's your number?
And he's not yet done.
I suspect. I suspect we've got different number 1s. Actually.
Well, it's got to be the second all time on the VFL AFL goal kicking list.
Well, that's mine.
Yeah, I think he's number 1 comfortably.
Yeah,
Gordon Coventry.
Nuts.
Gordon Coventry, 1299 goals, 306 games, 16-time Collingwood leading goal kicker.
Which is just... And you have a look at the scores that were happening in footy at that time. It's just how.
Yeah, so from 1922 to 1937, every single one of those years he led Collingwood in goals.
Yeah.
6 times he led the league in goals, 5-time premiership player. Again, you say these numbers, but you just got to say them again. 5-time premiership player, 16-time leading goal kicker. It's remarkable. But interesting,
Hall of Fame legend, AFL Hall of Fame legend.
Yes, absolutely.
But interesting, only 1 best and fairest. What does that say about the award?
Midfield bias.
Oh, it says these were, they call them the Invincibles. So the 4 flags in a row, 27 to 30, and then they won also another 2. Was it 35, 36? They were just so far and away the best club of that era.
So the other thing with him is, 1299 goals, just for context. So he's obviously first for the Pies, second overall? Yeah.
Second overall,
Second at the Pies is Peter McKenna with 838 goals.
Yeah.
Now, that's a gap of 461. That's Jamie Elliott and Brodie Myercheck's career goals combined. That's the gap.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary.
And this is, I think, where we're balancing. I think Collingwood's a great example. You're balancing the more modern and recency bias with a bit more, and you can take a step back and look at Gordon Coventry's resume and his career and say, yeah, that's a legend of that club. He is an icon. He is the he's a face of it.
Well, think about this too. You mentioned Peter McKenna, and I am old enough to have seen Peter McKenna play in the flesh. He is one of the all-time great full forwards in footy history, Peter McKenna, and Coventry is 400 whatever goals ahead of that.
Yes.
He's a walk-up.
Well, he's an 8, yep.
Okay, so we've got Coventry number 1, Pendle's number 2.
And we're not too concerned about the ranking, but I think it does help.
Well, Mount Rushmore's even, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll do it for the sake of it, but who are we talking about for the other 2?
You can throw a few names around.
Yeah, so I think there's a few, and I have a feeling there's a couple of names you'll say, so I'll go with another one. And it's a player that really feels like the face of this club, and that's Nathan Buckley.
Yeah.
260 games, which is 7th overall, a Brownlow medal, a Norm Smith medal, as you touched on before, 2002.
Yeah.
7 All-Australians, 6 best and fairest, and I think most people have him in that conversation of best player to never win a premiership?
Yeah,
the few, yeah.
There's a few in it, but I think he's in that.
These sort of types, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's in that conversation. And
are you kind of to our point off the top where we're saying, you know, it might be easy to be influenced by players in the media or coaching, and he's done both.
Yeah.
Is there a sense of that?
I think so. Just like I mentioned to you last week when we were
so we shouldn't be considering his coaching
We
career.
shouldn't, but I think we do. It's the same with, you know, awards that are named after such and such player. You know, I think that helps to sort of reiterate the name
hang on,
of the player.
but sorry, I'm not trying to be clever here, but are we saying his coaching career adds to his claims or detracts?
No.
I think it
just
just makes
we're looking at just the playing career.
No, but I know.
Subconsciously,
yes,
though. But are you saying
it should?
No. I think that Buckley's still there. I think he's definitely in the conversation. He's, you know, one of maybe a handful that you could have in spots 3 and 4.
To me, he's clearly number 3.
Really? Number 3?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and this is not just me saying, oh, look, I'm not such an old codger, but no, superstar. And 200, what was it,
260 games.
Norm Smith, you know, which despite what I said before, you know, it was a pretty great performance. Brownlow, and 6 best and fairest, 7 All-Australians. You know, it speaks for itself. And he was powerful, and he was, you know,
another one of these guys. Like we've mentioned Rashudo, we've mentioned Black. These big body, bullocking midfielders.
But you know, you think of him, you know, surging out of the middle like that. You know, early on there was a bit of a knock on his kicking at times, but I think he fixed that up. But
you could say that about most midfielders, I think, certainly in the last 30 years.
But I think as an icon, as a sort of a, you know, in terms of status, he ranks as high as, well, you know, most Collingwood players.
Do you think most Collingwood people would have Bucks or Pendles higher? On like they're both probably going to have both on there.
Does it depend on your vintage, maybe?
I suspect now most would probably have Pendlebury.
Tip the hat to
because he's 120 games past Buckley. He's 1 All-Australian fewer, and how many BNFs fewer? One BNF fewer.
Yeah, but that's that consistency.
2 premierships.
And a soon to be 140 games. I mean, it's.
If we were to start looking elsewhere, there's a name that's standing out to me, and I've changed my mind a couple of times looking at Collingwood, and I think maybe it was the discussion about like icons who you can just picture on the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, and it's not to cut you off, but it is hard to weigh up how much do you go with icon and how much do you go with
played
the most games.
Can I chip in here? Because I think this is almost the most symbolic example of a guy whose numbers aren't going to stack up, but in terms of respect and iconic status, right up there.
I hope we're on the same page.
Bob Rose.
Oh, not quite.
I know who you're thinking.
I like that.
I think I know who you're thinking.
Who are you?
I think you're thinking of Peter Dacos.
I think I'm thinking of Peter Dacos.
Yeah, well,
when you think of a guy who's on the list, I mean, Rose is a great call, and you're right. It's not the numbers, but it's the gravitas.
Well, I'll tell you why not the numbers for Bob Rose, because he left the club relatively young to go and play country footy. But so he's 152 games, 1 premiership, 4 best and fairest, 1 leading goal kicker. So the numbers
look okay.
But he you know, no more respected figure in Collingwood's history. I guess I'm just sort of thinking on the run here. Maybe one thing that you take away from it is a lot of that sort of iconic status is tied up with his time as Collingwood coach.
Yes,
and how phenomenally unlucky they were. And just for you young'uns out there, I mean, under his coaching, they lost the 64 grand final by 4 points. They lost 66 by 1 point. They lost 70 by 10 points after being 44 points up at half time.
Do you want the collie wobbles on the Mount Rushmore? I can make jokes because they won a flag this year.
Yeah. Look, I think Peter. Yeah, I do think the iconic status has to count for some.
Talk about families that'll end up on the Mount Rushmore, on the family Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put Peter Dacos up there because you can just get the chisels out, make a few changes, and turn it into Nick in.
Well,
in 15
can I just say,
time.
I think Colleen Dacos should be on Mount Rushmore because she's one of the great women in the football world.
Other names, Lou Richards. I mean,
I can't. Well, can you? Sorry, I'm not.
A former
ghost of Lou Richards it's hard to, if you're around Melbourne or around football in the 70s and 80s, there was no bigger name in football than Lou Richards.
I thought it was Jezza.
No, but Lou's, in fairness, Lou's reputation was shaped post-career, as good a player as he was.
Yeah. You've given thought to Dane Swan at some point?
Well, I mean, Dane Swan's a name. We talk about iconic players. I mean, probably not as iconic as Peter Dacos, but I mean, he's another one that is, I would say, I think Bob Rose is someone that I spoke to someone in our office who's a mad Collingwood supporter, and Bob Rose was one of his first players he said.
That's what I'm saying.
But with the caveat of we can't sort of...
I can't remember if I mentioned that to him or not.
But
I think Dane Swan, I think Peter Dacos, I think Buckley. I think these guys are way more Collingwood and way more iconic. Tony Shaw is another player.
Let's not just... he's more than just a addendum here. 313 games, a premiership. And it's hard to overstate the significance of that 1990 premiership. 32-year premiership drought, the Collie Wobbles.
It's a great point.
He led that premiership. And he, I remember it, painfully because I'm an Essendon supporter, but his captaincy of that team is one of the great captaincy performances in football history. He grabbed that team and said, this is what the standard you've got to get to, and he drove that. He and Lee Matthews drove that premiership. So he's a massive figure in their history.
All right, where are we leaning here? Because we need to move on.
I think it's a clear Pendlebury, Coventry, Buckley.
Yeah.
And we're arguing the fourth between...
And it's really tough.
Rose, McKenna, Thompson, Shaw, Dacos, Swan, whoever other name you want to throw up there.
Okay, well... We'll just have to vote, I guess. I'm going to go for Rose because whilst there is that thing about the coaching, as a kid growing up and even as an adult, the reverence with which his name is put out there, I can't go past that.
I won't be too disappointed if Bob Rose gets on, but I tend to think Peter Dacos. I really think
for a guy that hasn't done a whole lot of media and didn't get into coaching.
Yeah, but I think now that he's the same as these other guys because he now is back in the public eye again because of his sons playing.
Yeah, so he has done some media, incidentally.
Yeah,
and he's
but I think
very good.
If we talked about this 3-4 years ago, I think he'd still be on that shortlist.
Yeah, I do too.
Gee,
it's tough.
I'm okay. I'm happy with Dakes or Rose.
Are you happy with Dacos over Shaw?
Jeez.
It's tough. And McKenna. McKenna, are we ruling McKenna out?
Well, it's tough, isn't it? I'm happy with Dacos over Shaw because he was he was a great player for different reasons. Oh, God, I hope he doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm worried about upsetting both of them. I get on well with
both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're voting, and I know we probably have to move on to the next club, but I think it's Dacos.
I'm happy with Dacos. Apologies to
the name,
Bob Rose.
I really do think that name, and that is a factor as well. The iconic names, and we spoke about Alex Jezelenko before. I really do think that Peter Dacos and the Dacos name.
Without blurring the lines there, but yes.
I can live with that.
Okay, sure.
So we're going.
You have Rowan's number, by the
way. He certainly does. So we're going. In order, we are doing an order.
Yeah.
Coventry, Pendlebury, Buckley, Dacos.
I think so.
Happy with that. Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
any current players really quickly? I mean, Nick.
Oh, I mean, it's hard to say.
Give it time.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem ridiculously premature.
Darcy Moore?
But, no, Nick's the one. If there's one that's going to do it, it's Nick.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And he'd be knocking his old man off, I imagine.
Oh, gee, there's a family Christmas chat. We should move on. Rohan, you've been looking at this club for a long time.
Too long.
Taking
years off my life.
Can I sit this one out?
We'll just leave this one to you, but it is time to look at the Bombers. So Essendon, and there are some, talk about Hall of Fame legends. There are a few names that the Bombers have produced, whether that's playing or coaching or a bit of both as well. And this is going to be a tough one.
It's tough and not because, like, at the top end, I don't think it is.
They pick themselves?
Really. Yeah, I think they do. And it's interesting with Essendon, I don't know, another club may have done this, but I can't think of too many that have. Essendon, as well as a team of the century, which most of them did, Essendon did a Champions of Essendon ranking thing where they ranked the top 25 players.
It's interesting that they would do that. The club ranking their own players, and they did this. So they did this.
Is it like do they have a team of the century as well?
They do.
Okay, but this is separate.
Yeah.
This is since
correct.
So, up until recently.
Yeah.
So they did this.
I'm pretty sure it was 2002.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and it included current players at that point.
It did.
Yeah.
And one whom I thought was a bit controversial because I thought it was like here's a sop to the young generation.
Right.
So I thought that I'll get to this, but number one is clear cut, and it's one of those iconic names. It's Dick Reynolds. 320 games, 4 premierships, 3 triple Brownlow medalists, an AFL Hall of Fame legend, 7 best and fairest. You know, won a Brownlow at, what was it, 20 or 21? You know, like absolute prodigy. No, I'm not so old. I saw him play, obviously. You know, even the end to his career. So he was coach, and 1951, John Coleman famously got suspended in the last home and away game and missed the final series. So and that was a premiership losing moment. Dick Reynolds came out of retirement and played in the grand final as captain coach. Essendon lost by, I think, 11 points to Geelong. But you know, just stuff like that. I mean, it's the legend of Dick Reynolds is one of the great football examples. So
Think of the Bombers, he's on the Mount Rushmore.
And definitely. And the other one, it's some people would say even more obvious. They named the goal kicking medal after him. John Coleman. Only 98 games. You know.
Yeah, so this is the controversy, right? So you talk about, stats don't matter, but they kind of do. But I think in this case, you look at the return, the strike rate.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Over 5 goals a game.
Yeah, one of 2 players in history to average more than 5 goals per game. I haven't written down how many goals he actually kicked.
537 is my count.
In 98 games, 2 premierships, 6-time leading goal kicker, AFL Hall of Fame legend, named the goal kicking medal after him, kicked 100 goals in his first season, 12 goals in his first game.
Yep.
One of the great high marks of all time. And having spoken to a lot of people who watched him play, the late great Jack Jones, Essendon icon, played with him. You know, listening to Jack talk about playing alongside Coleman. Friends of mine old enough to have watched him play. You know, the crowds literally followed him from end to end. You know, how many players in the history of footy have been of that stature? So, you know, a relatively short career, sadly, 1949 to 1953, was it? 53. Injured his knee flying for a mark. Tragically, you know, had we had the medical techniques we had now, he would have been playing again and played another 10 years. But he didn't, and that ended his career.
So I think they're pretty clear cut, right?
Absolutely.
And just before we move on from Coleman, you did touch on it, the 98 games. I imagine he's going to be the only player.
It's a great question.
With that under 100
Under
games.
100 to make the... And not just make it, but feel like a lock.
Yeah, no, I'd say so.
Do we? And I'm not saying this because I want to penalise him, but should we penalise him at all for only playing the 98 games? 5 seasons, was it?
No, because to me it just sort of adds to it because his stature is such off the back of relatively few games. You know? I mean,
if he played 250 games, we're talking about greatest player of all time.
Well, we're talking about leading the goal, probably the all-time goal kicking list, right?
There are people, they tend to be older vintage, but there are people who say he was the greatest player of all time.
Yeah.
Forget just
small sample
goal
size,
kicker.
but it's interesting, isn't it? So, well, that's 2 Hall of Fame legends.
Yeah.
There's a third that we could look at as well.
Yeah, well, I've got
we're in order so far here. So
well, the last 2 spots are hard. I think this guy. So this guy in the Champions of Essendon ranking, this guy I think came in at number 5. I've got him higher. He's number 3 for me because he's a modern era player. Sort of changed the face of ruckwork.
I see where you're going. Yep.
I'm talking about Simon Madden. Started out as a key forward. In fact, I saw Simon's first game. You know, it was a goal kicking prodigy. gravitated towards a full-time ruck only after about 3 or 4 seasons. Mobile, huge mark, could go forward and kick goals. Technically, one of the best ruckmen of all time. Any ruckman will tell you that. His palming techniques and his bodying and whatever.
Change the position?
Yes, he did. He absolutely did. And changed it in the sense that he brought a new level of mobility and potency up forward. You had to be able to kick goals when you went forward. But in terms of the craft, as good as we've seen. And the record is just out of this world. 378 games record.
Off the top of my head, not many ruckmen are making, those that are used in those kind of, positions.
It takes
not
a toll.
making.
Exactly. That's a really good point.
Oh, there are not many believe me, there are not many ruckmen I'm letting on these Mount Rushmore.
So
Madden's one.
Oh, that's right. You hate ruckmen, I remember.
378 games, 575 goals.
Simon, I know Simon will be watching this. Jake Michaels hates ruckmen. 378 games, 2 premierships, Norm Smith medal in 85, beating out for the Norm Smith a guy who kicked 8 goals, mind you, in Dermot Burren.
Yes.
3-time leading goal kicker, 4 best and fairest. So for me, he's a lock at number 3.
Yeah, and we're in order. Yep. I've got Reynolds, Coleman, Madden, 1, 2, 3.
Which leads to me. It's funny we're talking about it. But some great names miss out. So for me, number 4 comes down to a choice of 2. So some apologies first. Tim Watson, my hero, 32 on my duffel coat, 4 best and fairest, 300 plus games.
Yeah.
Bullocking,
the lore of his
rover.
When he came into the league as such a young kid as well, like that.
He was
it adds to the
15 years, 10 months. I saw his first game. It was a draw against Richmond out at Waverley in 1977.
I don't think that gets enough. I don't think people understand that or give him enough credit for that.
15.
Yeah, because we just wouldn't see it now.
Well,
you can't.
We
You're not allowed to.
But it's an incredible part of his story.
Yeah, and not only that, he was one of Essendon's best players immediately. Like 1978, his first full season, he was one of their best handful of players.
And he's another one of those guys that's 300 games, 300 goals. Third for the club in games and 8th in goals, 3 premierships and 4 best and fairest. So he's no slouch. Like he's certainly worthy of consideration, as is James Hird.
Well, okay, so I'll cut to the chase here, otherwise we'll run out of time. Essendon's had, probably 2 great eras. That era, 40s and 50s, and you're talking about there, Reynolds, Coleman, and one guy I'm about to bring up. And the later era, we've just thrown up Madden, Watson, Terry Danaher, fantastic, dual premiership captain, blah, blah, blah. You've thrown up James Hird from that later era. The guy that we need to throw up here, and close to as revered at Essendon as Reynolds and Coleman, is Bill Hutchison.
Yes.
290 games, 2 Brownlow medals, 4 premierships, AFL Hall of Fame legend, 7 best and fairest.
So that was where I was leaning with my 3rd choice. But 4th, I think, is very comfortable given the way that we've justified Madden. I think that sits comfortably with me. The stiff list is unbelievable. The 8th on the all-time goal-kicking list, Matthew Lloyd.
Well,
926 goals.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I'm sorry, apologies, I meant to throw in Lloydie, but it's interesting. James Hird, you guys should talk about Hird because you
feared him. But it's anytime I watched a Carlton and Essendon game, I feared what James Hird would do.
And I'd talk about that Champions of Essendon list. He was put at number 3 in that list.
Is that right?
Given that his career was still going at the time, is just unbelievable.
Says what a lot, doesn't it?
So he's another guy that's got 2 premierships and a Brownlow medal, 5 All-Australians, 5 best and fairest. He won a Norm Smith medal.
Yep, Hird, 2000.
Led the Bombers in goal kicking twice, 253 games, 343 goals.
It's a great resume.
And talk about for 8 years as well. So we talk about premierships and Norm Smiths and Brownlows and all these things. One part of it all that I think has to count for a lot is captaincy.
Yeah.
Captaincy is massive. And he was captain for 8 years.
And a great captain.
And I think it's too easy to let Hird's career as a whole be tainted by things off the field and from when he was a coach as well.
And from what it seems like, Hird's going to be more of the 5th, 6th, 7th sort of point, so he might not get on here. And I don't think that's got anything to do with, playing days.
Yeah.
Which I hope it doesn't.
Oh, no. It shouldn't. But no, well, higher than that for me. For me, Essendon's list, you've got those three we mentioned, and then you've got sort of Hutchison v. Hurd.
Yeah.
It's down to that for me.
So you're Hurd ahead of Watson.
400 gamer.
I've got Hurd ahead of Watson.
Right.
We should mention the 400 gamer as well.
Yeah, so this is interesting. When I was talking to you a couple of weeks ago, I said, have you got him even in consideration? And not really. And I'm the same. And I quite liked it because it was like, yeah, okay, great to play 400 games, but that doesn't get you in.
Yeah.
No.
And I don't think, and you're not knocking off.
There'll be another big example of that a bit later down the alphabetical list.
Yeah.
Well, a couple actually.
Yeah, there's a few. But okay. I think
I'm comfortable with that.
I tend to think, similar to what Rohan's saying, I think there's 4 that feel pretty comfortable as the 4. And if you said do a second Mount Rushmore of 5 to 8, I feel like that would be relatively easy as well. I think there's 4 and then another 4. So
I reckon Essendon, if we're doing reserve Rushmores,
the backups,
Essendon's is going to be one of the
pretty solid.
So in order, we're going with.
If you guys are happy with this, Reynolds 1, Coleman 2, Madden 3, Hutchison 4.
I've got them in the exact order here. I think that's the first one.
And apologies to a couple of players.
And credit to you two young tackers for not going the recency bias.
Well, I thought about putting Zach Merritt on, but I knew you wouldn't.
You built up your credits as well for this.
But it's interesting, isn't it? There's 3 guys in Reynolds, Coleman and Hutchison. The last game of any of that group was played in the mid-50s.
Yeah.
There you go. Hey, we've got one more club on this little section of the podcast before we take a quick little break and come back with the next lot of 6 clubs. And it is Fremantle. So we've gone from, 3 clubs very rich in history going back many, many years. Now we are jumping forward again. So we are looking at a club that, is sort of more in the modern era as we've spoken about.
And just because it may not have as many years, it doesn't necessarily make it easier for some.
No. And Freo is a club, I think, that can be a little bit difficult to kind of nail down. And there are some obvious ones, I think, as there always are. But when you get to that sort of 3 and 4, you could throw a blanket over it.
It's a decent body of work. When you say, and we said this about Adelaide, they're a newish club, but then it's nearly 30 years.
Yeah, exactly.
There's long enough to have some champions.
I went over for their launch in '94.
Who's your number one?
So
Jake?
I have 2 number ones based on 2 different things here. When I think of Freo, I think the best player to ever play for Fremantle is Nat Fyfe.
Yes.
He's a 2-time Brownlow medalist, 218 games so far, 173 goals. He averages just under 1 Brownlow vote per game, which is the 3rd best of all time. Docker's captain for 6 years, 3 All-Australians, 3 best and fairest, 2-time AFL MVP. He has struggled in recent years, but I think we do forget how good he was at his best.
I agree with that, sorry, go on.
Yeah, but I think this is where you're going to go.
Yeah.
I think his best was the best that any Freo player's ever played, as kind of judged by 2 Brownlows. But I think the face of Freo is still clearly Matthew Pavlich.
Well, I would go further than that and say, for me, Pavlich is a better player than Fyfe, as good as Fyfe has been. Pavlich...
And that's something to be said for the Brownlow being, weighted towards midfielders as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that Pav went there later in his career and was good as well.
Yeah. I don't think Pavlich was ever the best forward in the game.
No, but you're talking about a guy who won All-Australian gongs as a key defender
I
and a key forward.
I understand that. We're talking about a guy that... in Fyfe, and they're both on. I think that's pretty clear. Yeah. So
they're jostling. We're jostling.
We're arguing something that doesn't really matter. But I think Fyfe. I think we really forget how good he was. I really, I think so.
He's still playing.
He's still playing, but because his performance has really dropped off in the last year or 2, injuries, being pushed out of the midfield with some of the younger guys coming in. I don't think people give him enough credit. I mean, you can go back a few years. Some of the games he played, some of those head-to-heads with... I remember a couple of head-to-heads with Patrick Dangerfield were just phenomenal, where they both had like 40 and 26 contested possessions. He was, if not in the argument, he was consistently one of the top 2 or 3 players in the league for a long period of time.
Yeah.
I don't think Pavlich ever was.
Well,
you're leaning towards Pav 1, Fyfe 2, and you're leaning towards Fyfe 1, Pav 2.
No, I still think Pavlich is 1. Because when we're talking about Freo the club, who do you think of when you think of Freo more? I think do think of Pavlich. He was the captain for 9 years.
Disservice or not to Fife? Yeah. I think you're trying to almost like justify.
I think Fife was the better player.
I think we should. Sorry, you gave Fife's record. It's only fair we give Pav's record. 353 games. 8-time leading goal kicker, 6 All-Australian, 6 best and fairest. So he's got
700 majors.
Sorry, this isn't meant to be Fife, but he's got twice as many All-Australian gongs and best and fairest as Fife, and he's played 140 more games.
I think, and I don't know where you're a bit on the fence as per usual. You generally
I'm the facilitator here for you
guys. But I do think
you're holding out for Clive Waterhouse.
I think you're selling Nat Fife a little short.
No, absolutely not. But I think if you're looking at the bodywork over a long period of time, if I think of the face of Freo, it's Matthew Pavlich.
That's what I've said.
And this is because I think he was very approachable as a leader, as a player.
Yeah.
And I think Fife, and this is no crack at him whatsoever, but he's not that kind of leader, and he's not that kind of face of the club when asked to do in front of the media.
Yeah.
I think part of that is the leadership, and I think the gravitas that Pav has attached to his name at that era at that club is enough to get him over the line of Fife, who absolutely wonderful player, but you're talking about icons of the club.
Yeah, and that's where I think that's what I've said. So
okay, good. We're on the same page.
I think we're arguing the same thing.
So we've got Pavlich 1, Fife 2.
Yeah, I think we're pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, okay. So you should go next.
Yeah, I think 3 for me is pretty easy, and it's David Bundy.
Yeah.
And
give his record.
And I think I'm just thinking back a couple of years ago to.
Who's your favourite player?
He is one of my favourite players.
Couldn't listen to the podcast in 2021 without.
His first half of the season, he was on track to win the Brownlow.
Monday.
I mean, you'll still say that about every second player. But he is one of my... He's such a great guy.
You've got the most unpredictable sort of loves.
It's very strange. It's very entertaining, though. And then the complete opposite is the hate for the ruckman.
I'm still getting over that Brownlow's more important than the grand final one.
It's not more. I said it's more enjoyable to watch.
I agree. I think Monday, games record holder.
Yeah, so 307...
iconic moments that he had, like...
Oh, yeah.
Kicks after the sign.
376 games, most for the club. And like I said before, he wasn't just getting to 376. His second last year, halfway through the year, people thought he could win the Brownlow medal. He was that
longevity.
good for Freo.
See, the fourth is where it kind
of... loved players at that club, one of the most loved players in the league. The only thing that kind of does hurt him is, certainly compared to some of these other players, only one All-Australian and only one club best and fairest.
And this is, I think, part of the newer clubs is, when you compare them to these clubs that had periods of domination in a competition that was smaller, firstly, and probably easier to win if you were a good side. You are going to have the newer clubs where there are guys that are icons of the club that probably just didn't have the same accolades, and that's fine. Yeah,
but I think, aside from the games, 376, I don't think the numbers and the accolades tell the full story.
He's another Mark Bickley in a way for me, Monday.
And I think, as you said, he had an iconic goal after the siren against Richmond. I reckon he had another one maybe in the last minute to win it, also against Richmond, maybe. A very clutch player, a brilliant ball user. I still think of him and just one of the best 30-metre kicks going inside 50, hitting a target. Just a well-liked player and an iconic-looking player. Who we talked about before, Bruce Doull. I think the appearance of someone counts. It might sound silly, but I think it does count for something.
I'm thinking, what sort
of... Just the long hair, the long blonde locks behind him.
That's just the sort of
the surfer look,
isn't it?
Real Freo kind of
like
vibes.
You look good with that.
No surfer.
I think that's pretty fair. I can't imagine there are too many people that would argue that he shouldn't be on it. Now, there are a couple of other names that you could throw up for fourth spot.
That's 3, right? So
I think
we're happy and pretty
that's
happy.
That's 3, and I reckon fourth is pretty clear as well.
Who's that?
Sandilands.
Aaron Sandilands. 271 games, 2 best and fairest, 4 All-Australians.
One of the club. Okay.
And the only other, I'll throw it up, the only other contender I've got is Peter Bell.
See, Peterbell's one of those interesting players who split his time at clubs.
And if you took it as a whole, he'd almost be a walk-up.
Yeah. And this is the thing. And there are going to be some. I think there are going to be some very big names.
Yeah. So, and we're talking some of the best players of all time
that will not get on either list purely because they split their time down the middle. And we're talking about spoiler alert, Lance Franklin, and we need to have a big discussion about where he ends up on either Hawthorn or Sydney.
Spoiler.
Well, we're going to have a big discussion about that.
See, the legends of football always say, you want to be a one-club player. When they say that, what they mean is you want to get on ESPN Footy Podcast Mount Rushmore. Hey, that's the payoff.
What about Paul Hazelby?
Give his
Michael
numbers.
Walters.
Michael Walters where's he in the goals? He's
second all time.
Yeah.
Hayden Ballantyne, only 171 games, but iconic kind of figure at the club. Jeff Farmer's another one of those guys he played 6-7 seasons at Freo.
Yes, the Wiz,
and I think you probably, for someone who probably didn't see enough or all of his career, I probably still think of him as a demon. But he's not getting on either of these lists, is he?
I still think Waterhouse is stiff.
Sandilands probably does get the nod over all those other guys. Gee, I don't know about having back-to-back clubs with Ruckman. We can't have another one.
Do you make Sandilands taller than the rest on the Mount Rushmore too?
I think you have to.
Comfortably the tallest guy on any list.
I'm trying to remember what year it was, but the after party at the Brownlow, I was standing next to him, and I just started laughing, and I had to say to him, I said, I'm sorry. I said, but a lot of people must stand next to you and just start laughing. He said, yeah. That's just ridiculous.
Oh, dear. Okay, I think so. I guess we're in agreement then. So it's Pavlich,
Fife, Mundy, Sandilands.
And Sandilands.
And I think we've mentioned with a couple of other clubs, I mean, it's hard for Patrick Cripps or Zach Merritt to crack onto their Mount Rushmore, but the current Freo players, I mean, who knows? Caleb Sarong, Andy Brayshaw, they've got a long career ahead of them. It's not out of the realms that they knock Aaron Sandilands off.
Yeah, for me, this of the 6 we've done, this is the
weakest.
No, I was going.
Names.
I was going to say clearest cut.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I think we were all pretty. I mean, we were throwing up a few names there, but probably you're right on the 5 to 8.
Yeah, I don't think it's disrespectful to say. I think if we're ranking them in terms of the quality 1 to 6 so far, I'm pretty comfortable saying.
I think that was disrespectful.
I think Freo 6.
Rest assured, someone will interpret that as being disrespectful.
Probably it is disrespectful,
and
but
address all correspondence too.
Well, I think that's going to wrap things up for part 1 of the ESPN Footy Podcast, the Mount Rushmore special. Do stay tuned for part 2. Like I said, if you do have any, feedback, criticism,
there was always some.
Or if you want to let us know we're doing a great job, we are at Footy Tips on Twitter or X. But stay tuned for part 2 coming very soon.